Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is occupy. Let's take a look at some of the definitions or ways this verb is used. One way you're likely to hear this verb used is to mean to live or to have one's place of business in a particular space. You might hear someone ask about what occupies a particular location or who occupies a particular location. A second way to use this verb is to mean to fill or take up space, time, or the mind. In the summer, many parents worry about occupying their children's time, right? They're not in school, so what are they going to do all day? That connects to this particular usage. A third way you might hear the verb occupy used is to mean to hold a particular position or to hold a particular job. I've got an example sentence later that will use this particular meaning. A fourth way you might hear the verb occupy used is to mean to keep someone busy and active. So I'll note that with this particular usage, it's really common to hear a reflexive pronoun after it, right? So it might be something like she occupies herself. Herself is that reflexive pronoun. Or we occupy ourselves. Again, ourselves is that reflexive pronoun. And then we might describe what sort of activity or thing is keeping us busy. A fifth way you might hear the verb occupy used is to mean to take control of a place by military conquest or settlement. So, with this particular usage, I think you'll encounter it often if you're reading books about history or studying history as we learn about different countries occupying other countries or places. You should know that occupy is a regular verb. To make the progressive tense, all we need to do is add ing to form occupying. The past tense and participle forms of this verb are made by adding ed, but because this verb ends in a y, we have a spelling change. So we're going to drop the y, add an I, and then add ed. Our base verb, occupy, I, ends in a vowel sound, and vowel sounds are always voiced. So our past tense ending is going to make a D sound. Occupied, occupied. Now, let's take a look at one phrasal verb with occupy. You might hear occupy with. And this connects back to an earlier definition we looked at. So this phrasal verb means to keep someone or to keep oneself busy or distracted with some sort of activity or maybe with an object, a thing. An example of this could be, don't worry about him being bored. He can occupy himself with his phone. So his phone is what's going to keep him busy or distracted, maybe while he waits for a period of time. Now, let's continue using our verb of the day, occupy, in a couple different verb tenses. Today, we're going to practice the past perfect and the simple future, and we'll focus on using be going to with the future. Let's talk about the past perfect. To make this verb tense, we need to use the past form of have, which is had, and then the participle form of the verb. You can see that in our example sentence here. The men had occupied a national wildlife refuge for over 3 weeks. So here, this is that idea of taking up space. I know our first definition had a residence, or might think of that as a home, a building, but it could just be taking over land. If you want to make a negative past perfect sentence, you need to insert not after had. Here's another example. The army returned to cities and towns it hadn't occupied in years. So there you can see the contraction of had not, hadn't. Finally, if you want to make a yes or no question in the past perfect, you can start with had then you'll have your subject, and then the participle form of the verb. Had he occupied the CEO seat for very long before he was fired? So in this particular sentence, we're going back to that third definition of the verb about having a position or a job. So here we're referring to someone being the chief executive officer. And we're using the past perfect here to note that this was happening before the action of when he was fired or lost his job. Now let's take a look at the simple future. And again, we're going to focus on using be going to. We commonly use this with our plans. We might use it with predictions as well. And the thing to remember here is that our form of be is going to be in the present. So that's am, is, or are. And that will depend on what our subject is. So we'll, in our affirmative sentence, have our subject, a form of be, then going to, and the base verb. You can see that in the example I have on the screen. A new manufacturing company is going to occupy the former department store space. So here, again, this is going back to the first definition of the verb. We're talking about filling some particular location. And this might be, again, in the works. It's being planned. It hasn't happened yet. Now, if you want to make a negative simple future sentence, you need to insert not after your be verb. So you might hear, am not going to occupy, is not going to occupy, are not going to occupy. Or you might hear contractions, isn't and aren't, but we don't have a contraction with am not. Always good to review that. Let's take a look at our example. This meeting isn't going to occupy the whole afternoon. So again, this is the idea of filling or taking a lot of time. So this meeting isn't going to last for 4 hours. Finally, let's look at making a yes or no question in the simple future. We want to start with a form of be, then we'll have our subject, and then we'll use going to and our base verb. Let's look at our example. Are these decisions going to occupy your thoughts all week? So again, kind of taking up space in one's mind. Okay. Now let's spend a couple minutes looking at words that are related to our verb occupy. And the first word we're going to look at is the word occupation. This can have a couple different meanings. We'll look at 2 today. One way to use the noun occupation is to refer to a job or a profession. Here's an example of that. The U.S. Department of Labor data projects the home care profession will grow more than any other occupation. So the recent article kind of looking at maybe 5 to 7 years out, where will we need more workers in what types of jobs, professions, or occupations? And this report said home care professionals will be needed. A second way you might encounter the word occupation being used is the action, state, or period of occupying or being occupied by military force. So in this usage, again, you might encounter this in history books or as you read current events, particularly about military events. An example of this could be the UN has condemned Russia's occupation of Crimea. This sentence may not make a lot of sense to people, but you can always Google this to get a little more of the backstory. There is a territory that has sort of been disputed between Ukraine and Russia, and Russia used military force to occupy this particular area. The next word we're going to take a look at is the noun occupier. This is a member of a group that takes possession of a country or some area of land and are taking that possession by force. An example of this: how have the occupiers treated civilians? So civilians would be people who are not military or not part of the fighting forces. So here we're asking about how is that group kind of treating your average citizen. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.